Well, hundreds of lives have been lost, thousands displaced, and property worth millions destroyed owing to the extreme weather prevailing across the region. Before we begin our discussion, my colleague Daniel Arap Moy brings us this report.
Jen Wamboy, a 64-year-old mother of 15, has become one of the faces of the Mai Mahiu tragedy. Her voice, trembling yet resolute, cut through the chaos of the ongoing rescue operations in central Kenya. Her family was caught off guard by the swift rise of the water in the middle of the night. As she stood amidst what remains of her once cozy home, the depth of her sorrow was clear.
I never imagined something like this could happen to us. We've lost everything. My cows, my crops, they're all gone. Where shall I run to for help?
As the search for the missing continues, the people of Mai Mahiu stand together, united in grief, but also in strength. Another survivor, Naheson Igeria, has spent the last 2 days searching for his cousin. She was swept away by the torrents of water while in her sleep, never to be seen again.
We suspect she could be right in this spot where we are standing because all her belongings are right here.
The Kenyan military is spearheading the ongoing search and recovery efforts, but the task before them is huge. And the other rescue teams here face many challenges as they try to assist the affected residents.
We are doing the rescue with our bare hands. The machineries that are there, before they get into here, some of them we hear that they are no fuel. It's a process, and it's very challenging.
The town of Mai Mahiu has long been known as a key rest stop for long-distance truck drivers. For years, drivers have relied on it for key services and basic amenities, including places where they can take dinner, motels and fuel stations. But the latest floods have left businesses struggling to stay afloat. An operation to find missing people is continuing, with more support expected to arrive in the affected areas. For those who survived this tragedy, the journey to rebuild their lives and find closure has only started. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN, Mai Mahiu, Kenya.
Well, joining me now to take a closer look at East Africa's extreme weather conditions are from Nairobi, Professor Alfred Omenya, environmental architect and principal researcher, EcoBuild Africa. Also joining me in Nairobi, Major Venant Ndigila, head of disaster operations at the Kenya Red Cross Society. And with me in studio, Dr. Gulaid Arstan, director, IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Dr. Artan, let me start off with you here to give us a clearer understanding of what's going on. Heavy rainfall and flash floods have been witnessed across East Africa in the last few weeks. The impact has been devastating to lives, to property, to infrastructure. Why has the rain been so heavy, or is the rain heavier than normal?
Yes, thank you very much for having me. The rains, they have been heavier than normal. Actually, especially if we go to Nairobi, the season hasn't ended up, and we're over twice as much we're supposed to receive in Nairobi, at least in Dagoretti. Why they have been heavy? It's a conjunction of a lot of things. One is that we have a very conductive environment looking from the ocean. We have a El Nino that's, although waning, still there. But also we have a positive multiplicator effect from a phenomenon called the Maiden-Julian oscillation that goes through the equator, and now sometimes it can augment or suppress. At this time is augmenting the rains that we're receiving. Also, the intertropical convergence zone, a band of clouds that go around the globe following the tilt of the earth, is now right in Kenya. So it's moving north. So that brings rain from the Indian Ocean and the Congo Basin. So we're in the middle of a vacuum that's sucking all the moisture. around us.
So during this period in East Africa, it is known as the long rains, though. So you're talking about this season above normal rains. How long is this heavy rainfall likely to last?
It is waning. So as you said, this is the long rainy season. It's March, April, and May. So by this month, it's supposed to wane. But from our prediction is that it will go to early June. But it's going down.
It is going to wane. Yeah. Major Ntigile, let me get your reaction from what you're seeing on the ground, because we've seen a lot of destruction. It is quite huge. Lives are being lost, property destroyed, infrastructure destroyed. What are you witnessing on the ground? What is the scale of the unfolding crisis?
What we're witnessing on ground is a state of desperateness, so to say, to some communities, especially those who are very actively affected. I'm talking about those who have been displaced from their homes. Of course, the level of destruction is huge because we have seen massive deaths, and we have seen a lot of destruction around the infrastructure, and a lot of disruption of business, of normalcy, as we may want to call it. But what we have also read in this season is it's the abnormal behavior of these rains. Dr. Atan has talked about the increase, the enhanced rains, but also there are some new dynamics which you are seeing in this season and these rains for that matter, where the rains are focusing or concentrating in one sub-county, for example, and then it rains so heavily within a very short time, which means, again, new demands around drainage, especially in urban areas, new demands around drainage in new areas, up to new areas in the lower land. So to us now, it means like chasing the effects of these rains, because everywhere they are focusing, they are concentrating, there's a lot of destruction, there's a lot of needs to rescue people who find themselves at a risk of losing lives or being injured. So every time we are getting calls to go and rescue people more than the ordinarily we do in this season.
Professor Omenya, let me come to you here, because flooding in Nairobi itself in particular is not unusual. But we've had city officials blaming encroachment on land surrounding the rivers for the current flooding crisis. What is your view? How much of the flooding is purely climate related vis-a-vis urban planning and human encroachment?
The flood situation in Nairobi, we know is partly caused by climate change and other natural issues, extreme weather events. That is what has been from time immemorial. But we know that the impacts of the floods on the city have been worsened by poor city planning. It's been worsened by encroachment, as you rightly said, on the natural drainage system for Nairobi, which is the Nairobi River and its tributaries, going all the way to the Athi River system. That has been encroached, and people have built on it. On the other hand, what the city has been doing is creating some little drains after compromising that natural drainage system. And whatever the city does is not necessarily based on logic. In fact, it's not even based on the volumes of water that one expects during floods. Yes, it'd be another issue if the city is telling us that we have a drainage system that was designed for a particular capacity, and it's failing now because the volumes of water that we have is way more than that. But the truth of the matter is that the entire drainage system in Nairobi, be it by the roads or the broader drainage system that takes surface water off the city, is not based on any logic at all. In fact, I've seen many roads in the city that don't have any drainage at all, and some that had drainages that have actually been blocked. And you see, even in neighborhoods and so on, there's no logical way in which what actually moves.
Let's look at that issue of how the city has been compromised. One, what would you say is the single biggest problem, the single biggest challenge that has caused the flooding? I mean, you've talked about the drainage system, the lack of greenery and so forth. What is the one biggest challenge here for the city?
I think, Beatrice, the problem for me, and I've said that time without number, is people thinking that plans are pieces of paper that nobody has to follow. You see, the plans that we've had are quite logical, and there are things provided for in those plans, including the new plan that is the most recent of the Nairobi city plan. But I'll give an example. The expressway as we have it doesn't exist in the new plan. So on one hand, we generate these plans that sort of envisage how the city functions, that actually considers some of these things that we're talking about, like drainage and flooding and so on. And then we dump the plan there and continue operating totally outside of the plan. I think if you just had fidelity to planning, yes, our plans are inadequate. But if you had fidelity to those plans, that would reduce the impacts of what you're actually having now.
Right. So, Dr. Artan, I want to come back to you on what is happening during this season and compare it with what has been happening in the past, because Kenya also experienced the El Nino phenomena in the 1997 to 98 years. Is the rain that is causing havoc now, is it worse than the 1997 El Nino, weather phenomenon?
Thank you very much. No, it's not worse than 97, 98. That was more widespread than this. This is actually, even in Kenya, is in central, so it's limited. But the rain is, if you compare with the average, what we're expected to receive in the season of Mam for Nairobi, now we're over, the last time I've looked at it was over 600 millimeters. So
what is the normal average per day?
Normal average is 200 something. So we're way over average. So it's very unusual, definitely, especially in this area. But let me add you, this was predicted because it's driven by global weather pattern. The IGAD climate prediction application with the national METs of the region, including KMD, we issued a forecast in August, actually warning everybody that this will be way above average rains. That all areas that usually get flooding will most likely be flooded.
Right. So let's look at the response of government here. Major Ndigila, the Kenya government in particular has asked the people affected to move to higher ground. In your view, do the current rains constitute a national disaster?
The current situation, the impacts and the related effects coming from these rains, of course, have led to a lot of needs for response and support for those who are affected. And it is very evident that the needs are now superseding, or rather they are beyond the capacity which has been there in terms of immediate response, especially around rescue, life-saving, and other emergencies. And this, again, is indicating that there is a need to do more and more in terms of responding to the impacts of these rains. So the level of being a national disaster, this, again, it's to the authorities that may be or rather, they may declare according to the criteria which they use, but it is very evident that a lot needs to be done, more needs to be done to respond to the effects of these rains.
Right. Dr. Atan, your view, I mean, does this constitute a national disaster?
Yes, it constitutes a national disaster. And I might add that maybe we need to move to a proactive way of going to an anticipatory action when a forecast is done several months ahead, that actions are taken and provisions are made, drainage is cleared. So absolutely is a disaster.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we will look at what can be done to limit the devastating effects of extreme weather and how those worst affected can cope. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Still with me, Professor Alfred Omenya, Major Venant Ndigila, and Dr. Gulaid Artan. Before the break, we looked at why East Africa has been so hard hit by flooding. Let's now look at some ways of mitigating and coping with the disasters. So, Dr. Artan, historically, this region, as you've earlier mentioned, historically, there have been seasonal rainfalls. What exactly has led to the change that we're witnessing today?
It's really tough to do an attribution, but definitely if you look at what has happened in this region, 2010, 2009, 2010, major drought, 14 drought, then 18, 19 floods, 20 to 22 drought, then we have floods from last year. I think definitely climate has changed, and this has an effect in our region. And what we know from climate change is that the extremes will be more. So we'll see more floods and more drought. And we are an exhibit number one for climate change in this region. Also, I might add, in 2018, we had 5 major cyclones in the Western Indian Ocean, in a region where usually every 2 years you get only 1 cyclone. And that's what caused the desert locust outbreak that we have seen the year after. So definitely I think climate change has a lot to do. And I think the way forward, in my opinion, is to build resilience and to climate-proof the region.
Right, let's talk about that climate proofing, Major Ndigila, because the Red Cross has been at the forefront really in the humanitarian crisis. What are the regional governments though doing in terms of disaster response? Do they have the adequate mechanisms in place? Who is doing what? What is the general state of the region's disaster preparedness?
I've seen a lot of efforts, a lot of improvement around dealing with climate-related disasters or climate-related shocks. And this we have seen mostly around the use of climate information. There is quite a lot of improvement in the region because you have seen first a lot of cooperation within the countries, the member countries. We have seen a lot of coordination in terms of the sharing of early warnings and related early action, and which means, yes, we are moving towards more around the anticipatory action, where we are able to understand what is facing us in terms of the climate shocks and agreeing, understanding and agreeing that we need to do something and we need to do it today. But really, a lot needs to be done. Needs to be done around on a risk reduction approach, where we intend, or rather where we cushion the communities at risk, either to lessen the effects or to avoid the risk in total. This may include even relocating the communities at risk. I may want to identify some programs where we have done, Kenya Red Cross did with the Kenya government, right, in a county called Kilifi, where we relocated communities from the flood risk area. And ordinarily, we get at least 1,000 households affected by floods every season. But since then, we are getting around 80 households, 50, because the others were moved and are not moved very far from there.
Right. So let's look at those mechanisms, Professor Omenya, because if the future, as we've heard it, the future trends will be such extreme weather conditions, flooding is likely to be with us for the foreseeable future. what measures should governments be implementing? What long-term strategies can be implemented to build resilience?
Yes. Beatrice, what you're saying is that you actually start off with planning. You know, planning is the place where you put long-term mechanism to ensure that your infrastructure is safe, to ensure that people live in safe places, to ensure that development happens in safe places. So we need to actually go back to the plan and ask ourselves, what do we do about areas that flood and so on. The easiest, and we have examples of those things. For flooding, what we need to do is to create what we call the metropolitan open space system, because water movement happens through a system. Once you create discontinuities in those systems, you will actually end up with areas of the city flooding. You need water to move from every point where it is to the exit from the city. And that requires that you look at all the open spaces within the city, including the natural spaces, including the parks, including large public institutions with huge open spaces and so on, and then design a drainage system that links all those, that works both with the natural system and also works with a man-made system. So we need to plan, number one. Number two, we need to ensure an integrated drainage system that is linked with a broader metropolitan open space system. Then, of course, we need fidelity to implementation of these plans. We must actually, do risk planning. There are some places where there should be no settlement at all, because the consequences are dire, and because trying to deal with those consequences or even making people settle there is extremely expensive. And then on the other hand, once we have this particular plan that has been sized on the basis of data that's available, in terms of these extreme weather events, the next thing would be then to implement that systematically, so that if you're working on a neighborhood drain, right, you know the size that is appropriate for that. And then, of course, we need to then be serious about disasters, as it actually were, because disasters will still happen after putting all those measures in place. Yes, we shall still always have an extreme weather event that we didn't actually foresee. So we need to ensure that our response measures are there. We can't use Red Cross as the government of Kenya, Nairobi government response measure.
So, Professor Owenya, let me get your final thoughts here, and as you make your final comments, some advice to members of the public and to policy makers.
I think to the members of the public, one thing that we must actually start working with is knowing that these disasters will be there. We need to learn from the disasters that have actually happened. The best way to invest your money, the best way to determine where you want to live, the best way is actually to look at some of these scenarios that, yes, at some point in the future, you may not be able to leave your home, or your home may be destroyed totally and so on. For the policymakers and for government, I think we just need to get serious. We do have plans, and many people in Kenya believe that plans are pieces of paper for planners. They are not. There's a reason why these people go to school. They should actually follow those plans. We have quite a lot of information already that can be used to reduce the impacts of some of these measures. It is interesting that even the projections by government's own institutions, the Met, telling us that we'll actually have heavier rains, this thing has been totally ignored by those in government and by policymakers. The question is that when the Met told us that we're going to have heavier than usual rains, how was that information used? The least the ordinary citizens expect from policymakers is that they will do things that then would protect the lives and the property of ordinary people. We don't need to hear cries. We need to hear what government has done in terms of executing the plans. Yes, we can accept that some of those measures may not be adequate, but they cannot just keep quiet there or telling people that move to where. These are the issues we're talking about. We need a lot more accountability from government.
Right, Major Ndigila, to the public particularly, what advice would you give the public in such a situation?
In terms of, again, maybe looking forward, there's a need, of course, maybe at policy level. Yes, we need to do more, but also we need, as regional countries, to maybe to integrate more around disaster risk reduction and development, where because we have enough information now, we have enough predictions which can guide us around the climate-related shocks. But what I may want to advise the communities, it is that there's no doubt that we are in one of the extreme climate shock in this region. So there's need now for them to continuously understand where they are in relation to the risk factors around this range. One is to be able to understand progressively the behavior of this range, be very much forewarned by observing and getting information from the experts. There's a lot of information everywhere around ensuring that they are not exposed to these floods.
Right. So what do you think needs to be done? What would be your advice, probably from a policy level, to ensure that future climatic shocks are minimized?
First of all, I would say early warning that's tied to an early action. Sometimes when we do, us or and the Mets of the countries, when we do an early warning, there's not much action going. Second is to go to what the Major was mentioning, and I was doing before, to an anticipatory action. Basically, for these floods, when it was predicted, is to move to prepositioning things that are done, boats, cleaning drainage ditches and those things. And also realizing that as whatever we do, the climate is not what it used to be. This will be with us. As a region, we are already over 1.5 degrees hotter than we were in the 60s. And we'll see more of this intense rains and floods. We need to prepare.
Indeed, a very informative discussion there. But that's all we have time for on this edition of Talk Africa. A big thank you to all our guests. Professor Alfred Omenya, Environmental Architect and Principal Researcher, EcoBuild Africa. Dr. Gulaid Artan, Director, IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center, and Major Venant Ndigila, Head of Disaster Operations, Kenya Red Cross Society. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation online through our social media handles on Facebook and X. You can also catch the show on our YouTube playlist. Do keep the conversation going and join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team here in Nairobi, until next time, it's goodbye.